Hello everybody, how's it going? I'm the Tchenovstok and welcome back to Tchenovstok for episode 6 of the series. In today's episode, guys, a whole lot of stuff will be going on, so sit back and relax. First, we'll be getting into the Tchenovstok main train station. So it's not going to be very grand and glamorous by any means. Tchenovstok is still a small city, but it is going to be one of the most important landmarks in town, so I will be spending quite a bit of time and a lot of attention to detail in this particular area. So we're going to start off with the train station for I'd say the first third of the episode, and the last 2/3 we're going to focus on a big car parts factory just outside of town. But I'll explain a little later, guys. Our car parts factory is going to have a hidden secret. So for the time being, let's focus on the train station. It's obviously a station that I found on the workshop, and I had a couple of other contenders to choose from, and this is the one that I went with. The main reason is I felt like it sort of fit the architecture of the region. I know there's a whole bunch of different architectural styles that were present in the Soviet Union way back when, but I just found that this train station looked a little better in this region. It is a little plain though, I will say, so we're going to spruce it up here in just a couple of minutes. But along with placing down the train station, of course we have to place down some train tracks. For the next couple of minutes we're going to focus on creating the rail lines coming into Tchenovstok and getting that all set up. Now, what I am doing right now, guys, as you can tell, I'm building a bridge, obviously, but this bridge is based off of the infamous Bridge of Death, just near Pripyat, the city that's right next to the Chernobyl power plant. And, as I've been developing this whole area, I've sort of been taking some key landmarks from Chernobyl, and, you can't forget the Bridge of Death. So if you guys don't know the story behind this bridge in real life, I'll just give you a brief little rundown of why it's so significant. So the night that the Chernobyl power plant reactor exploded and the event started to unfold, near Pripyat, where this bridge was, you could get an excellent view of the power plant. Now, the night of the explosion and the fire, nobody was aware of the dangers that were present during those events, so everybody sort of rushed out of their homes and went to view the spectacle that was going on just a few kilometers down the railroad track from this bridge. Now, unfortunately, from what I was able to gather, I don't think anybody who viewed the event unfolding from this bridge survived very long after the events, hence the name, the Bridge of Death. So yeah, that's the basic story of what happened here. Of course, you can't really get a good glimpse of the power plant from this bridge, unfortunately. The rail lines aren't really configured in such a way that you can easily see the power plant. But I'm going to remove some trees towards the end of this episode, and I'm going to make it as clear as I possibly can, so you're able to see the power plant somewhat clearly from these railroad tracks here. So one of the reasons that I kind of had no choice but to include the, building of a railroad station and a factory in the same episode is because of these rail lines here. So at the beginning of the episode, you may have been wondering, okay, why are we going through these two unrelated items? But it's because, as you're seeing right now, these rail lines sort of lead into Tchenovstok. And right where, exactly where I'm working on right now, this is where the factory is going to be. So in just a minute, we'll get into that. And the factory sort of feeds off of the same rail line that goes into the train station. So I figured, the train station isn't really much of a big project by any means. So it didn't really take up too much time in this episode. We're not done with it yet, though. We'll get back into that in a couple of minutes. but I was keen on getting started with the factory, so the main train station is just going to have to wait a couple minutes. So I'll give you guys a little bit of Chernobyl history, if you guys aren't aware. So I've done a little bit of research on this large factory that was right outside of Pripyat. And I've been wondering like what this factory was all this time, and I never really took the time to research it until now. And I'm glad I did, because there's so much like really neat stories behind this factory. I was never aware that this factory had so much interesting things going on. So this factory in real life, I guess the what this factory in the game is based off, it's called the Jupiter factory. And what they did in this factory was they produced like record players. I believe that they produced some appliances as well, like dishwashers or washing machines or whatever, like a lot of home use items. But in the background, secretly, behind closed doors, this plant was producing semiconductors for the Soviet military. Now, when I found that out, I was flabbergasted. I was like, oh man, that's so cool. But yeah, that's sort of like one of the hidden secrets of this factory. I'm not sure when any of these details were released to the public, but yeah, that's such like a cool little story. It's like the most Soviet thing ever. And it got me thinking, what kind of cool little story can we get into the Tchenovstok series that's similar to this one here? Now, this is where you guys come in, and I want you guys to come up with a sort of secret project going on in the background in the Tchenovstok car parts factory, maybe for like, I don't know, the KGB or something, or I don't know, but I'm leaving it up to you guys to decide what is going on behind closed doors in the Tchenovstok car parts factory. So forgive me if I'm going back and forth here, guys. I told you I was going to get started on the factory, but then I briefly went back to the train station. I kind of forget like how my whole filming sequence goes sometimes. But now that we're done with the train station, we're going to get started on the factory. And I'll tell you right now, like the development of the factory was kind of weird. Like I didn't have a solid plan on how everything was going to look like. So as I progress through building the plant, you're going to notice I'm demolishing a bunch of things and rebuilding them. So forgive me on that little thing, guys, but I think you'll really like the results at the end. I'm super happy with the way this plant came out. So we could say that this car parts factory, it could be like a factory for Lada car parts. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but in Russia, I think like the main, like the GM of the Soviet Union was Lada. I think it's like one of the more popular car brands that probably still is going on in Russia. But yeah, I just think this is so cool. So obviously with this being such a large plant, a lot of like the materials required to build the car parts, like metals and plastics and whatever the case may be, are being delivered by train. So this is why I'm building this nice warehouse in the back that's connected to our rail network. And we're going to detail this a little bit further in the episode. For the time being, I'm just going to focus on the layout of the factory, which does take quite some time to get everything just right and to look really cool. And after that, we're going to get into some precise detailing. And also another thing that I was trying to focus on during this build was I wanted this factory to look like it was expanded multiple times over the years. So I guess we could say that this factory predates Tchenovstok altogether maybe. It was part of like the old city, we could say. So in a minute here, you'll see that I'm going to plop some more buildings on top of what I plopped right now. Some will look a lot older than others. Most of the buildings that you're going to see in this factory are from different factory packs. Like the first buildings that you see here with this large smokestack, those are from the Mr. Miyagi, or the Miyagi Motors factory. And I'm not quite sure like what all the other ones are from. Some are like, I think one of these buildings is part of like a Soviet factory pack. So as you can see, they all look different. Some of them are probably a lot newer than others. But that's just part of the look that I wanted this build to have, like as if this factory may have started like in the 50s, and then it was expanded multiple times during the 60s, and then again in the 70s. So we'll have like multiple eras of expansion, I guess. So you'll see that going on in this episode. But what was really interesting, guys, and this is why I appreciate you guys so much as viewers, ever since I started the Tchenovstok series, a lot of you guys, especially from Eastern Europe, have been teaching me so many awesome and interesting things that I could have never researched on my own. And I'm super grateful for that, by the way, guys. Like, you guys are really awesome. But what I wanted to say is, there's a couple of you guys that suggested some really cool cities that I go check out on Google Maps, and some of these cities are really cool, guys. Like, I'm so happy that you guys suggested them to me. One example is the city of Toliati. Forgive me if I'm butchering these names, but the city of Toliati is super cool. I'll put up a picture right here, but it's a planned city that's been built and expanding since like the 1930s. And some of these subdivisions, or these blocks, if you want to call them, are so neat. And I don't know, like the whole layout of the city is so interesting. And what's really cool is this is a planned, like a nuclear city, as they were referred to back in the Soviet days. So this city is sort of built upon large factories, huge industry plant, as well as a nuclear power plant. And this is kind of like the same thing that's going on in Tchenovstok, but Toliati is like on a much larger scale. And what's interesting is in Toliati, there is like a Lada plant that makes cars, and I think the GM has a corner of the plant to make GM cars too, which is super interesting. And like I said, like there's a nuclear power plant in the town, but yeah, so like a lot of these cities are just super interesting. They're unlike anything you could ever find anywhere on Earth, and I was completely unaware of these kind of cities. Like, you know, you think of a typical planned Russian city, or Ukrainian or Soviet city, and the first thing that comes out to much of the Western crowd is Pripyat. You know, that's like the official Soviet city that everybody thinks of. But I've been slowly learning that there are so many more really interesting cities all across what used to be the Soviet Union. Another example is Magnitogorsk. Magnitogorsk. Wait, no, I'm not even saying that right. Magnitogorsk. I'm not even sure, guys. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. But this city as well is super cool. This city has like a huge, what looks like, I'm not even sure, like a steel plant maybe? Hence the name, like Magnet. I'm not even sure, but it's so cool. Like the entire city is just built from this massive steel plant, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Like, these cities tend to just stop. I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's like Miami. You know, like you have suburbs and urban sprawl, and then all of a sudden you have a canal where the city just stops. Much of these Soviet cities are kind of the same way. You'll have like a ring road going around them, and on one end is just endless fields or forest, and on the other end you have like these massive residential skyscrapers. I don't know, it's just so cool. But yeah, thank you guys so much for suggesting some really cool places for me to check out. If you have any more, let me know, and I will be sure to go check those out. what we could say is this factory employs a large portion of the population that's in Tchenovstok as well. Much like what was going on in Pripyat, I'll talk a little bit about the Jupiter factory again. The reason that was built in the first place was Pripyat was growing at such a rate that they needed to find some work for some of the residents that were moving in. You know, they couldn't employ an entire city in one nuclear power plant. There had to be like some little other outlets to provide income for all the families. So that's why the company, I'm not sure if it's like the Jupiter company or you know, the plant was called the Jupiter plant. But anyways, they set up shop in Pripyat just to provide jobs for the additional workers in the city. So we'll just say that this factory is kind of in the same situation. But yeah, we're going to get into some detailing now, and this proved to be a little more difficult than I expected it to be, just because, first of all, Tchenovstok is based in the 70s, so I had to stick with some 70s style assets and props. But with this being a Soviet city on top of that, there's of course not going to be any English writing on anything. You won't find any like brand trailers or containers or anything like that. Like, I'm not even sure if like Maersk or you know, all those known companies even, you know, existed in the Soviet Union at the time. I assume that there would probably be like some Western containers that made their way into the Soviet Union as like trade and stuff was going on, but I don't know. I tried to limit as much as possible to have like some English writing on anything, signs, whatever the case may be. I tried to get everything to only be exclusively Russian or Soviet. So it kind of proved to be challenging, especially with what I'm doing right now with these container rail carts. And you saw me plop down a few truck trailers. So that was a little bit of a challenge. You'll see that a lot of containers are just plain. But yeah, I made it work out. And these here too, I know nothing about trains, guys, but I believe this is like an Eastern European train engine. Anyway, I subscribed to this a little while ago, and I kind of forgot that I had it in my workshop list. But it proved to be very useful in this situation here. They actually look really good, like they're so well textured. And of course, another thing that added a level of difficulty to this build was the terrain. Now, I kind of never realized that this whole plant was built on a slight inclination, but if you guys have ever played City Skylines, you'll know that large buildings don't do very well, even on the slightest inclinations. You tend to have like a huge dip on one end of the terrain and a steep cliff on the other side. So I had to play around with the terrain all over the place. Luckily, I was able to make everything work because this plant is made up of like 10 different buildings. I was able to adjust every building to specific heights and just kind of conglomerate everything together nicely. So I think it turned out pretty good, even though, you know, I ran into so many challenges. But at this point, guys, the plant is really shaping up, and you'll see at the end of this episode, when I zoom out, you'll get a glimpse of the entire city with this plant. And I'm really glad that I chose this location for the plant, as it's like really close to downtown. It's not very far for all the workers to come into. So yeah, I don't know. And just the overall aesthetic of the plant is just really cool. It adds another aspect of realism to the city, and I really hope that I built something that resembles like a Soviet factory that's accurate from this era. So just drop a comment down below what you guys think about this whole build. One of my dreams is actually to go out and travel to Ukraine and Russia and explore a bunch of these old cities. Like, with me being such a history buff, I'd much rather go to Chernobyl than Disneyland, honestly. I really hope I get the chance to do that someday. So for the last minute or so, I'm just going to finalize some quick little details that you'll really get a glimpse of during the final cinematics. So yeah, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for this episode, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It was super fun to build this plant. This is one of the most enjoyable episodes that I've had to create yet. So I really hope you liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing to the channel for many more videos just like these coming down the pipe. Also check out my Patreon page, guys, if you're interested, if you want to support the channel. So that's it for me. Stay tuned to the end of this episode for some awesome cinematics coming right up. Until the next episode, guys, please take care.